This place isn't for the likes of you. Leave before you embarrass yourself. The words cut through the air like razor blades. Manager Henrique, with his starched suit and disdainful gaze, spoke loud enough for everyone in the branch to hear. Silence was followed by muffled laughter. A man in a straw hat, simple shirt, and worn boots stood at the counter. It was Geraldo Almeida, holding a brown envelope in his calloused hands. His sun-baked face was serene, but inside, humiliation was already burning. Customers whispered, some laughing, others simply watching with cruel curiosity. "What's that peasant doing here?" whispered an elegant young woman, adjusting her designer sunglasses. A laughing executive commented, "He must have come to exchange money or pay the electricity bill." The scene was one of collective judgment. Everyone saw only the straw hat, unable to comprehend the strength and history hidden behind the man. Geraldo didn't react. He simply took a deep breath. His calmness irritated the manager even more. Henrique approached, feigning a wry smile. "So, sir, what did you say your name? How much do you want to transfer? 15 million?" He repeated the amount aloud as if it were a joke. Laughter echoed through the agency. The employees glanced at each other, complicit in the mockery. A security guard, hiding his expression, also laughed. The scene resembled a spectacle, and the humble farmer was the prime target. Geraldo felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't the first time he'd suffered prejudice because of his appearance, but never in front of so many people. With each laugh, he remembered the years he'd worked from dawn to dusk, building everything with effort. He felt the sweat running through his veins, not from the heat, but from the shame they were trying to inflict on him. Still, he didn't lower his gaze. He knew something none of those mocking faces could have imagined. An elderly customer, sitting in a corner, shook his head in disapproval. But he said nothing. A culture of silence reigned. Who would dare defend a simple man against a manager in a tie? The farmer stood his ground, as if he had already experienced life's hardships. Every second seemed like an eternity, but he knew the game hadn't even begun yet. Henrique, overcome with arrogance, tapped his fingers on the counter. "Sir, let's stop this nonsense. If you have nothing to do here, please make room for real customers. This is a respectable bank, not a corral." The words sounded like a slap. An elegant lady in the back laughed out loud, covering her mouth with her leather handbag. The chorus of insults seemed to grow with each sentence. Inside, Geraldo struggled with his anger. He wanted to scream, to expose his true colors, but something held him back, the desire to teach an unforgettable lesson. His silence, at that moment, was worth more than 1,000 impulsive retorts. Each insult was like adding fuel to a fire that would soon burn too hot to ignore. The farmer leisurely adjusted his straw hat. The simple gesture further irritated Enrique, who had expected submission. "Look, he's even posing," someone commented. Geraldo didn't respond. The agency, with its gleaming marble floors and frigid air conditioning, seemed overshadowed by the heavy mocking atmosphere. There, everyone thought they already knew the outcome. A nobody kicked out the front door. But there was something hidden in Geraldo's gaze. A spark of determination, a hidden secret that no one could decipher. The manager didn't realize it, but he was forging his own downfall with every disdainful word. The straw hat, so ridiculed, would soon become the symbol of an unforgettable day. And so, amid laughter and humiliation, began the story of a simple man who carried the weight of dignity and the power to turn the world upside down. The bank didn't know it yet, but it was about to learn its most painful lesson. Never judge anyone by their appearance. The main branch was known as the jewel of the city. Enormous chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting light off the pristine marble. Modern paintings adorned the walls, and even the perfume in the air seemed designed to impress. Employees strolled around in tailored suits and polished shoes, smiling delicately to please the most select customers. There, everything revolved around status, appearance, and power. The customers were no exception. Women with designer handbags, men with shiny watches, young men showing off their expensive cell phones. Every gesture was calculated to demonstrate their place there. When Geraldo entered, his presence was felt like a stain on the perfect fabric of ostentation. For them, he wasn't just different. He was an affront to this environment of vanity. The surprise was immediate. A mother discreetly approached her son as if this unassuming man represented some kind of danger. Two young men in ties looked him up and down, laughing softly. It was as if the entire agency had welcomed an intruder. Geraldo walked slowly, oblivious to the stares, but he felt the invisible weight of judgment. Meanwhile, Henrique, the manager, was adjusting his tie in front of the smoked mirror in his office. He prided himself on the respect he commanded, not only for his position, but also for his control over every detail of the agency. Seeing the farmer, he frowned and smirked. For him, this man was an opportunity to demonstrate his power, publicly humiliating those who didn't belong there. Geraldo approached the counter with a firm stride. Each tap of his boot resonated against the marble, drawing attention. The employees looked at each other, some already suppressing laughter. He placed the envelope on the counter and said calmly, "I need to transfer this amount." The cashier raised an eyebrow in surprise and immediately called the manager. Henrique appeared with a fake smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" His tone denoted a veiled arrogance. Geraldo repeated, 15 million. The surprise was instantaneous. Within seconds, laughter spread. They found it impossible to believe that such a simple-looking man could talk about such high figures. The manager laughed with the customers. 15 million? Are you sure you didn't make a mistake in the calculation? Maybe you're talking 15 reals, who knows? Laughter echoed. Geraldo kept his gaze fixed, without lowering his head. The atmosphere in the branch became increasingly stifling, like a courtroom. Despite the laughter, there were curious glances. Some wondered if the man was hiding something, but the prejudice was stronger. No one could imagine his words were true. For them, it was all a joke. The farmer, however, knew that every second of humiliation had a purpose. He silently observed every face, every gesture of contempt. He prepared for the moment when the situation would change. Inside, a slight, almost imperceptible smile appeared. The game had barely begun, and in that luxurious bank, so proud of its grandeur, one of the most humiliating stories for the elite and the most magnificent for the dignity of a simple man was about to be born. "Look, even his smell betrays that he's not from here." The words came from one of the suited customers, muffled but loud enough to be heard. The laughter that followed echoed through the room, further fueling the humiliating atmosphere. Geraldo stood his ground, envelope in hand, but every glance pierced his skin like a knife. The prejudice wasn't just in the words, but in the way they avoided him, as if he were invisible, or worse, unworthy of being there. The employees pretended to be busy, but they chuckled. The saleswoman, who had earlier called the manager, whispered to her colleague next to her, "Imagine this man has 15 million. It must be a scam." The comment was followed by another burst of laughter which sounded like another arrow piercing Geraldo's dignity. He heard everything, but chose to remain silent. Manager Henrique, now center stage, watched with satisfaction. He felt like he owned the scene, as if he were putting on a show for those present. With each disdainful word, he believed he was gaining more authority. The agency, once a simple bank, was transformed into a stadium. The farmer was the target, and the audience complicit. Geraldo took a deep breath. His hands, marked by fieldwork, gripped the envelope tightly. Every detail of that scene was etched in his memory. He had faced the sun, the rain, crop pests, and financial crises, but nothing hurt as much as the unfair trial. It wasn't about the money, but the public stripping of his dignity. Henrique, not hiding his mockery, decided to raise his voice. "Sir, let's be honest. This figure doesn't reflect your reality. Don't you think you're dreaming too much?" The audience laughed again, fueled by the arrogance that emanated from every word. Geraldo, for his part, simply looked up and calmly observed the manager. This calm was disconcerting. Henrique expected an explosion, expected indignation, but he was met with firm silence. "Oh, so you're not going to answer? Better this way. It'll avoid further embarrassment." The comment provoked more laughter. Geraldo, however, remained motionless, solid, seemingly unshakable. But inside the wounds were opening. A young man, a casual bank customer, muttered to his friend, "This isn't right. This man doesn't deserve this treatment." The friend simply replied, "Forget it, it's not our problem." And so the majority opted for silence, the same silence that so often fuels injustice. While Henrique savored his momentary victory, Geraldo reflected on the true power he wielded. It wasn't just money. It was an opportunity to teach everyone that life takes a heavy toll when we judge without knowing. But the moment of revelation had yet to arrive. The farmer adjusted his hat once more, as if it were a natural gesture. But in that small movement, there was a symbol of resilience. He was willing to endure to the limit. The greater the humiliation, the greater the impact of the truth. And with that first look of contempt that had become a collective chorus, history was heading toward a point of no return. The man in the straw hat was no longer a mere stranger. He was the focus of a lesson no one would ever forget. 15 million? The manager's gasp of astonishment echoed louder than any laughter. He repeated the amount as if it were a joke, as if it were impossible for this simple man to even mention such high figures. The entire room erupted in laughter. To them, that figure was as far from the straw hat as heaven was from earth. Henrique took the opportunity to dramatize the situation even further. "Sir, you may be mistaken. Did you mean 15 reales? Or 15 oxen? Because we're talking about real money, not fantasy." The audience roared with laughter, and some even applauded. The humiliation was at its peak. Geraldo took a deep breath. His silence wasn't cowardice, but strategy. Every insult stored in his memory would become ammunition. He remembered the days carrying sacks of corn on his shoulders, the sweat dripping onto the dry earth, and the price paid for every achievement. No amount of laughter could erase what he had built. The manager, with a victorious air, looked at the customers as if seeking approval. "Look at that. It's like a scene from a soap opera. This man thinks he can transfer 15 million. Imagine!" More laughter. The sound was deafening, not because of the decibels, but because of the cruelty. It was as if a man's dignity were being auctioned off in a public square. An employee, trying to contain his laughter, asked, "Can I offer you a coffee, sir? But I warn you, we don't accept credit here." Another wave of laughter erupted. Geraldo remained serious, holding the envelope firmly. His serene expression began to intrigue some who, between laughter and doubt, wondered if there was more to it than meets the eye. Despite the humiliation, there was one detail that no one noticed. Geraldo's gaze. It wasn't one of despair or submission. It was the gaze of someone who knows how to wait. The gaze of someone who already knew the weight of time and the power of patience. He didn't need to prove anything at that moment. His time would come. Henry, feeling he hadn't inflicted enough humiliation, decided to deliver the final blow. "You know, sir, the best thing you can do is return to your farm. Look, the most we can accept is a simple savings account to hold the market money." Laughter erupted again like fireworks, but this time, something changed. Geraldo raised his head firmly and looked Henrique in the eye. His serenity mingled with a spark of defiance. The manager felt, for the first time, an inexplicable discomfort. This man, humiliated so many times, seemed to have a trump card he hadn't yet revealed. The farmer didn't respond immediately. He simply adjusted his hat, a gesture that was beginning to become a silent sign of resistance. Some customers noticed this and stopped laughing without knowing why. There was something about the man that clashed with the caricature they were trying to create. And so, amid insults and laughter, the unusual request for 15 million left the agency in suspense. No one believed it possible. No one except Geraldo himself, who knew that soon everyone present would have to swallow every word of contempt. "Someone tell this old man there's no money coming in from the farm." The phrase came aloud from a young, well-dressed customer, prompting laughter from almost everyone. Manager Henrique took advantage of the refrain to reinforce his authority. "Exactly. This bank deals with serious customers, not jokers. 15 million? Honey, you couldn't get that in 3 lifetimes." The laughter spread like wildfire, consuming every last ounce of Geraldo's dignity. With each word, more people got involved. An elegant lady commented, "These people come here just to dirty the place." Another man muttered, "They should put a sign on the door. No country people allowed." Prejudice was no longer a whisper, but a public spectacle. Geraldo stood in the center of the arena, facing a crowd that laughed at him as if he were a clown. Henrique leaned across the counter with a cold smile. "Tell me, sir, if you had all that money, wouldn't you be dressed here, appropriately?" He pointed to the straw hat, the worn boots, and the plain shirt. Every detail was a source of ridicule. That outfit may be good for digging a hole, but not for negotiating millions. The audience laughed even louder. Geraldo stood firm, but the pain throbbed inside him. It was as if all his life's effort had been reduced to a cruel joke. He remembered the sleepless nights, the sweat he'd shed on the fields, the times people thought he couldn't handle him. Now, seeing all that work ridiculed hurt him more than any physical wound. An employee trying to be witty said, "Perhaps you're confused? Perhaps it's 15 million seeds, not money." More laughter. The agency seemed to enjoy the humiliation, as if it needed the spectacle to feel powerful. Henrique simply crossed his arms, satisfied with his role as the host of the mockery. But something was strange. Some customers were starting to get suspicious. Geraldo's silence, instead of seeming submissive, was beginning to seem calculating. It was as if he knew something no one else did. This doubt was uncomfortable, but the chorus of mockery was even louder. Henrique, sensing the discomfort of some, decided to increase the dose. "I'll call security. Maybe you should leave here before things get worse." The threat seemed exaggerated, but it drew ironic applause from some customers. It was the ultimate humiliation, a man treated like an intruder in a place where, ironically, he had more right to be than anyone else. Geraldo took a deep breath, as steady as someone weathering a storm. He knew that every word thrown at him would only increase the weight of the coming revelation. Patience was his weapon, and dignity his shield. Even wounded, he remained standing. A young employee whispered in the background, "What if it's true? What if he has that much money?" His colleague laughed. "Impossible. Look at him. He has nothing." Prejudice seemed impervious to logic. No one there could conceive that greatness could be hidden behind simplicity. Henrique, satisfied, delivered his verdict. "This bank is not a circus. Get out of here, sir, before it becomes an even bigger laughingstock." But what he didn't know was that the point had already passed. The public humiliation that he believed to be his triumph was about to become his downfall. And so, amid cruel laughter and sharp words, the silent farmer became, unbeknownst to anyone, the protagonist of a turning point that would forever mark that luxury agency. "Aren't you going to say anything? Are you speechless?" Henrique's provocation resonated throughout the room, as if trying to provoke a reaction from Geraldo. However, silence was his response. And this bothered him more than any words. The manager expected shouting, expected indignation, but found only calm. This serenity was beginning to unsettle those who were laughing. Some customers whispered, "That's odd. He doesn't seem desperate." Anyone else would have walked away in shame. Doubt spread amid the laughter, like a crack in a seemingly solid wall. But Henrique didn't allow himself to doubt. To him, that silence was just the stubbornness of a clueless old man. Geraldo recalled his youth, the days when he had to endure similar taunts. He remembered being called crazy for dreaming of expanding his lands when he was told he would never prosper. And with each memory, his patience grew stronger. He knew how to wait. He had waited all his life. The manager, irritated, slammed his hand on the counter. "Answer me, man, or are you just going to stand there like a log?" But Geraldo simply looked up, staring at him. There was no hatred, only firmness. That look made Henrique step back for a moment, uncomfortable. It was as if the man knew something he didn't. Strategic silence was beginning to become a weapon. The agency, once filled with laughter, now had moments of unsettling silence. Some clients no longer knew whether to laugh or look on in curiosity. There was something unsettling about the way Geraldo remained calm, as if he had the situation under control. Henrique, however, couldn't show weakness. "Very well, since you're not talking, I'll end this little show. Security, escort this man to the exit." But before anyone could move, Geraldo reached into the envelope and firmly grasped a sheaf of documents. The gesture immediately drew attention. The laughter died away. Everyone was wondering what was in that envelope. Henrique laughed, trying to hide his nervousness. "Oh, are you going to show me the bar bills? Purchase receipts?" But the calm in Geraldo's gaze made the mocking tone seem fragile. He didn't say a word. He simply adjusted his hat and held the documents in plain sight, not handing them over yet. The entire agency held its breath. It was as if everyone instinctively knew that this silence concealed something serious. Henrique tried to regain control. "This doesn't change anything. You don't belong here." But his voice was no longer firm. Doubt was beginning to gnaw at his tone. For the first time, he seemed unsure of his own victory. And Geraldo, still silent, allowed this discomfort to grow. He knew that the more they laughed before, the quieter they would become later. Their silence, once seen as weakness, began to transform into the strength that would change everything. "If I really had 15 million, I wouldn't be here in these beggar clothes." Henrique's words fell like a stone on Geraldo's heart. The manager, in front of everyone, pointed to his straw hat, his worn boots, and his threadbare shirt, as if each item of clothing were proof of his poverty. The laughter returned, sharp as a razor. For many, this was the final blow, a simple man reduced to nothing before the luxury of the agency. Geraldo remained motionless. His silence seemed defiant, and that annoyed Henrique. The manager, overcome with arrogance, didn't just want to laugh at him. He wanted to destroy him completely, strip him of any shred of dignity he might have left. "You know, sir, this bank is no place for people like you. If you wish, I can recommend a more affordable bank, one more suited to your circumstances." The words cut him deeply, but Geraldo absorbed them silently. Life had hurt him many times, but this time it wasn't just about him. It was about the courage every human being should have, regardless of their appearance. It was more than just his personal honor. It was a reflection of how much the world still allows itself to be blinded by prejudice. The customers applauded Enrique's sarcastic comment. Others simply watched, torn between embarrassment and curiosity. One woman muttered, "It's ridiculous. You should be ashamed of yourself for being here." The chorus seemed to swell, like a bloodthirsty crowd in a modern coliseum. Henrique took the opportunity to escalate the situation. "Tell me, sir, where exactly do you keep this money? Under the bed? Inside a sack of corn? Or maybe buried in the grass?" The laughter sounded like whiplash. The manager was amused, but he didn't realize that every word he spoke was paving the way for his own ruin. Geraldo gripped the envelope tighter. His eyes shone, not with tears, but with determination. He thought about his career, the years of struggle, the moments when everyone had doubted him. That humiliation wouldn't break him. On the contrary, it only fueled the lesson it would teach. The atmosphere became even more tense. The laughter was no longer as spontaneous. Some were beginning to feel a certain discomfort, as if cruelty had crossed the line, but no one dared to intervene. Complicit silence was the manager's best ally. Henrique, confident he had the upper hand, approached. "You know what you should do? Go back to your land, take care of the cows, and leave the business world to those who understand." The audience erupted in laughter once again. Geraldo took a deep breath and lifted his chin. For the first time, he looked directly at the manager without blinking. His gaze was so steady that, for a moment, Henrique felt uncomfortable. But he hit it with another laugh. A brief silence fell over the room. It was as if, amid so many hurtful words, the weight of truth was about to be revealed. Geraldo hadn't spoken yet, but his presence was already beginning to transform the atmosphere. And so, with his dignity intact amidst his wounds, the farmer prepared his counterattack. The world might laugh now, but it would soon learn that those who appear small can have the greatest power. "Enough jokes. I'll prove I don't belong here." Geraldo's voice, firm and deep, broke the silence like an unexpected thunderclap. For the first time, he spoke in front of everyone. The impact was immediate. Laughter died down, eyes averted. From the manila envelope, he pulled out a carefully organized set of documents. The glow of truth began to threaten the darkness of mockery. Henry tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "What is this, sir? Market papers? Overdue bills?" His irony no longer held the same force. The confidence that had once filled him gave way to a slight unease. The curious audience leaned forward to take a closer look. Geraldo, unhurried, placed the documents on the counter. The words on the cover spoke for themselves. Majority shareholder. National Bank. The shock was immediate. The silence that followed was almost palpable, as if the air had become too heavy to breathe. No one dared to laugh. Henrique paled. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. His eyes scanned the papers as if looking for a loophole, anything that might deny the truth. But there was no way. It was written, recorded, officialized. The nobody was, in fact, the master of the game. Some customers covered their mouths with their hands. Others looked away, embarrassed. The woman who had previously been mocking could no longer look at the man in the straw hat. The collective embarrassment was greater than any previous laughter. The show had turned upside down. Geraldo looked up, his calm voice breaking the silence. "I've always believed that a man's worth lies not in what he wears, but in what he builds. Today, once again, I see that the world still prefers to judge by appearances." Each word was a sharp blade that cut deep. Henrique tried to react, but he froze. His employees, once complicit, now bowed their heads. The audience who had laughed was in shock, unable to assimilate the revelation. The entire bank seemed eclipsed by the greatness emanating from this simple man. A younger employee, wide-eyed, muttered, "Oh my God, he's the owner!" The phrase spread like a whisper through the crowd, spreading like wildfire. Now everyone knew. Geraldo calmly adjusted his hat again. The simple gesture, once ridiculed, now seemed to carry immense symbolic weight. It wasn't just a straw hat. It was the invisible crown of someone who had achieved everything with effort and dignity. The manager, stunned, tried to apologize, but his voice wouldn't come out. His mouth moved, but he didn't make a sound. He had lost control of the scene, and with it, his entire mask of power. And so, before a silent audience, Geraldo demonstrated who was truly in charge. The humiliated farmer was, in fact, the most powerful man in the room. And that was just the beginning of the real lesson. The bank owner is standing right in front of you, and yet you laughed at him. Geraldo's words echoed like thunder inside the branch. No one took a deep breath. No one dared to laugh. The room, which minutes before had been filled with laughter and cruel jokes, was now suffocated by the weight of collective shame. The silence was so intense that even the sound of the air conditioning seemed too loud. Henrique was trembling. The manager, who had previously displayed arrogance, now looked like a frightened child, unable to confront the farmer. His hands were sweating. The knot in his tie seemed to tighten in his throat, and he was breathing heavily. He searched for words to regain control, but each attempt failed before they could emerge. It was a crushing silence. The customers, so quick to sneer, looked away. The lady with the expensive handbag, the suited executive, the insolent young man, all hung their heads, feeling the weight of guilt. The seemingly invisible farmer had become a giant, and it was they who cowered in fear. Every previous glance of contempt burned like a scar. Geraldo watched in silence. He no longer needed to shout, no longer needed to prove anything. The truth was there, printed in the documents, exposed for all to see. The man they judged by his clothes was the one who held up the roof over their heads. Every passing second deepened the shame of those who had humiliated him. A young employee who had been mockingly gulped. He muttered to his colleague, "How could we have been so blind?" The colleague didn't respond. The weight of that revelation continued to fall like an avalanche. It was hard to believe that the same man in the straw hat wielded so much power. The mask of arrogance had fallen, and everyone stood naked before the truth. Henrique, desperate, tried to compose himself. If there was any misunderstanding, sir, I apologize." His voice cracked, trembling, hesitant. The manager, once the master of the show, now pleaded like a defendant before a judge. But it was too late. No apology could erase the words spoken. No plea could disguise the humiliation. Geraldo didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at him with that serene, profound gaze that seemed to pierce his soul. The manager shrank even further. It was the first time he'd felt fear. Not of a boss, or of losing his job, but of a simple man whose dignity was his greatest weapon. Power had changed hands. The customers whispered among themselves, but the tone was no longer mocking, but rather regretful. Some muttered muffled apologies. Others simply stared at the floor. The spectacle Henrique had organized was going wrong. The shame was collective, and everyone knew they would never erase that day from their memories. Geraldo broke the silence. Respect isn't something you ask for, it's something you earn. But it should never be denied to anyone. His deep, unspeakable voice was more powerful than any shout. The room shook with the force of his words. It was the pure truth, laid bare before everyone. Henrique felt his world crumble. He knew his career was over, that his image was destroyed. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a mark that would never be erased. He had humiliated the man who supported his own work. It was a mistake that would cost too much to repair. And so, amidst the crushing silence, the ridiculed peasant demonstrated that dignity doesn't need shouting to be heard. The truth was enough for him. It was enough for him to be who he was. And in that moment, everyone understood. The bank was no longer the same. Now it's up to you to explain yourselves. Geraldo's words sounded like a judgment. The entire platform, packed with those who had humiliated him, cowered before him. The farmer, wearing a straw hat and worn boots, had become the judge of a guilty audience. It was the most unexpected turn of events those eyes had ever witnessed. The silence was broken only by the sound of nervous breathing. Henrique tried to straighten his tie, but the gesture was useless. Embarrassment shone through in every movement. He looked around for the customer's support, but found none. Everyone had realized that the manager was not an authority figure, but simply a little man hiding behind a suit. Geraldo, in a calm voice, continued, "I didn't ask for luxuries or applause. I only asked for respect. But what I received was contempt, mockery, and cruelty." His words resonated like hammer blows. Each syllable struck hard into the hearts of those who had previously laughed. The farmer didn't need revenge. He only needed the truth to crush the lies. The customers remembered what they had said. Every joke, every mocking glance now turned into unbearable guilt. The lady who had laughed out loud covered her face with her purse. The insolent young man trembled with embarrassment. The executive who had joked about a sack of corn shrank in his chair. The change spared no one. Henrique, desperate, tried to change his mind. "Mr. Giraldo, please understand. It was just a joke, nothing personal." But his voice sounded fake, desperate, almost ridiculous. The excuse didn't convince anyone. The audience, once complicit, now saw the manager as a villain. The stage had changed. Giraldo adjusted his hat once more, a simple gesture that now conveyed authority. "I'm no better than any of you, but I'm no inferior either. The respect you denied me is the same you owe any human being." The sentence fell like a judgment, impossible to refute. The employees began to cry silently. Some, embarrassed, approached and apologized. But Giraldo wasn't looking for excuses. He was looking for reflection. Money doesn't change anyone. What changes are decisions. And today, you chose to laugh when you should have been respectful. The weight of the lesson resonated throughout the agency. Henrique, defeated, could no longer speak. His tearful eyes revealed his despair. He knew he would lose everything: his position, his confidence, and above all, his respect. The humiliation he had inflicted on the farmer now fell upon him like a curse. The setback was relentless. The silent customers knew they were witnessing something historic. It wasn't just about money. It was about justice. The farmer demonstrated that power and humility can go hand in hand and that dignity always prevails. The turning point became a milestone, a lesson etched forever. Giraldo concluded firmly, "Learn today what you tried to deny me. No one is too small to deserve respect." The silence was absolute. No one dared to argue. It was the end of arrogance and the beginning of a new understanding. And so, amidst embarrassed glances, the farmer who arrived as a nobody left as the greatest of all. The change was complete, and no one would ever forget it. "You destroyed your own career with your own words." Giraldo's words broke the silence like a judgment. Henrique, the arrogant manager who minutes before had seemed the absolute master of the agency, was now trembling like a child. His face was pale, his hands sweaty, and his tie seemed to suffocate him. The public, previously complicit in his arrogance, now watched him like a defendant in a courtroom. Every glance that had previously accompanied his jokes was now one of condemnation. Customers whispered to each other, some shaking their heads in disapproval. "He doesn't know who he's messing with," one executive muttered. Others simply watched, silent, as if witnessing a spectacle that had turned against the star himself. Henrique tried to compose himself. He forced a nervous smile and extended his hand to Giraldo. "Sir, please, let's talk." It was a misunderstanding, but his voice was shaky, hesitant. It was the sound of a man in free fall, trying to grasp something non-existent. Shame ate away at him. The employees, once complicit, now discreetly distanced themselves. No one wanted to be associated with the manager's failure. The collective silence weighed like lead. The manager, who had used the public as a weapon, was now crushed by the gaze of those who had supported him. The irony of the scene was painful. Giraldo stood his ground, calmly confronting him. There was no need to yell or humiliate him. The weight of his presence was enough to dismantle the manager. "Respect can't be bought, Henrique. It's practiced, but you chose to despise it. Now you reap the fruits of your choice." The phrase touched his heart. Henrique stammered, trying to justify himself. I didn't know. I had no idea." But no one believed him. The excuse sounded hollow, too small to hide the arrogance he had displayed. Every word was a confession of weakness. The manager stood naked before the truth. Some customers murmured, "They should fire him now." Others nodded indignantly. The audience, which had once laughed, now demanded justice. The show had changed hands, and Henrique was merely a supporting actor in his own downfall. The bank, a symbol of power, was now the scene of his humiliation. The agency director, quickly informed, entered the room. His serious gaze scanned the scene. Silent clients, embarrassed employees, and a panicked manager standing in front of the main shareholder. He didn't need a long explanation. The scene spoke for itself. The verdict was written in the air. Henry tried to argue, but his voice cracked. The director simply raised his hand and said, "That's enough." His dry tone was more devastating than any speech. The manager crumbled inside. He already knew what was coming. Panic gripped every fiber of his body. Geraldo calmly didn't give up or demand punishment. He simply looked Enrique in the eye. "Life teaches us, if we want to learn. Today, you had the opportunity to learn the hard way." His voice resonated like a final warning. And so, before everyone's eyes, the once powerful manager was reduced to nothing. The panic that gripped him wasn't just about his position, but about eternal shame. It was the price of choosing to humiliate someone who never should have done it. "I could humiliate you all right now, but I won't." Geraldo's words broke the silence like a bomb. Customers, employees, and even the director held their breath. They expected fury, revenge, but they found greatness. The farmer's dignity overcame the power of money. His voice sounded like a hammer of justice. The audience, surprised, began to look up. No one expected that response. Anyone in his place would have gone out of their way to return every joke, every insult, and double cross. But Geraldo wasn't just anyone. He was a man forged by life, pain, and hard-won victories. Henry wept silently, unable to cope. The shame was more devastating than any punishment. The manager knew the farmer could destroy him with a single sentence, but he chose not to. This gesture, paradoxically, hurt even more. It was like a mirror reflecting his own smallness. Geraldo continued, "It wasn't me who lost today. It was you. You lost the opportunity to show humanity, to treat someone with respect without needing to know their fortune." His words moved everyone. The customers shrank in their chairs, unable to respond. It was impossible to escape that truth. Some employees wept silently. Shame overwhelmed them, but at the same time, something inside them awakened. It wasn't just about work. It was about life. The farmer was proving that dignity isn't about status, but about character. The unexpected response became an eternal lesson. The agency director watched in silence. There was nothing to add. Geraldo had already said everything. The silence that filled the room was now one of reflection, no longer discomfort. It was as if time had stopped to record each word. Enrique raised his head, trying to speak, but tears prevented him. He murmured, "Forgive me." But Geraldo didn't respond. He just looked at him calmly. He didn't need forgiveness. The weight of his conscience was punishment enough. The customers looked at each other. Some, embarrassed, murmured apologies. Others remained silent, but they knew they would never forget that scene. The unexpected response had hurt them more than any scream. It was impossible to erase that memory. Geraldo adjusted his hat, a simple gesture that now seemed to carry the full force of the moment. His posture was one of grandeur, not arrogance. He didn't need to crush anyone. He simply wanted to demonstrate that humility, accompanied by dignity, surpasses any luxury. Always show respect, no matter who passes by, because you never know who's really standing in front of you. Those were Geraldo's last words before turning his back on the defeated manager. And so, with this unexpected response, the farmer demonstrated that the greatest victory lies not in fighting back, but in staying true to one's essence. And that day, everyone learned that greatness is measured by character, not appearance. "You laughed at the man who pays everyone's salary here." The director's voice resonated firmly, breaking the heavy silence. The employees looked at each other in shock, and Enrique nearly fell to his feet. The revelation that Geraldo was the main shareholder had already shaken the agency. But now the director's authority reinforced the coup de grace. It was a verdict no one would dare challenge. The customers murmured in shock. Some, trying to leave discreetly, realized there was no escaping this shame. What had happened there would have already spread throughout the city, and no one wanted to be remembered as an accomplice to the humiliation. The name of each ashamed face would be etched in the collective memory. Henrique tried to defend himself. "Director, please. It was just a misunderstanding. A confusion. I didn't know." But his voice was weak, unable to bear its own weight. His justifications sounded like cheap excuses, useless given the gravity of what he had done. The audience looked at him with contempt. The director was relentless. "You didn't need to know who he was to treat him with respect. That's the mistake that can't be forgiven." His words were like a hammer that shattered any hope. Henrique felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. He knew he was finished. The employees, previously laughing together, were now silently weeping. They felt the weight of guilt and fear of what was to come. The bank, which had always prided itself on its impeccable image, was tarnished. The episode was now irreversible, and each person present would be remembered for their reaction. Geraldo watched impassively. He wasn't seeking revenge, only justice. "It's not me you should apologize to. It's every humble person who walks through this door and is treated as if they were invisible." His voice sounded like a moral echo. It was more than a diatribe. It was a warning for the future. The customers nodded, embarrassed. Many felt like apologizing, but shame paralyzed them. Geraldo's greatness made everyone feel small. He didn't need to shout to win. His truth alone was enough to put everyone in their place. Henrique, in tears, fell to his knees. "Please don't ruin me. I beg you." But he could no longer hide his ruin. It wasn't Geraldo who was destroying him. It was himself, with his own actions. The manager's panic was a reflection of the bitter harvest he had sown. The director firmly announced, "You are fired immediately. Hand over your ID and leave this agency." The entire room watched in silence as Enrique's career ended. It was a painful but necessary spectacle. Justice was being served before everyone's eyes. Geraldo stood serenely. He didn't need to applaud. He didn't need to celebrate. The simple fact of being there, untouched, was his victory. He didn't defeat Henrique. He defeated arrogance, prejudice, and injustice. That was what truly mattered. And so, amid tears and silence, the immediate consequence of arrogance was fulfilled. The manager who humiliated ended up being humiliated, and everyone learned that dignity always finds the path to victory. After today, nothing will ever be the same. The director's words were etched in everyone's minds. The agency, a symbol of luxury and arrogance, was now marked by the lesson in humility imparted by a man in a straw hat. Employees walked with their heads bowed, clients avoided eye contact, and the tense atmosphere betrayed the transformation that was beginning there. Geraldo walked slowly through the branch. Each step echoed on the shiny marble, but it wasn't the sound of worn boots. It was the sound of change. Where there had once been laughter and mockery, there was now silence and respect. The simple farmer had become the best teacher the bank had ever had. The employees approached one by one, apologizing. Tears flowed undisguised. "Excuse me, sir. I laughed. I was wrong." Geraldo simply nodded, without rancor. There was no need to ask any more questions. The shame had already served its purpose as punishment. The lesson was written on each of their hearts. The director gathered the audience and was clear. From today on, there will be no distinction between who enters these doors. Whether a man in a suit or a gentleman in a hat, all will receive the same respect. It was more than an order. It was the new philosophy born there. Customers murmured among themselves. Some vowed never to judge anyone by their appearance again. Others were still absorbing the weight of the scene. The truth was, no one would leave without a mark. The bank, which had always prided itself on its figures, now had a greater value: dignity. Geraldo remained calm, with no need to boast. He didn't want to be remembered for his money, but for his lesson. "I'm a man like any other. What brought me here wasn't fortune, but work. His simple phrase resonated louder than any speech. The atmosphere, once cold and luxurious, felt different. The shiny marble no longer reflected only ostentation, but also the weight of reflection. The agency had changed its image. Luxury alone no longer sustained its image. Now it also required respect. The employees whispered, "We'll never laugh at anyone again." Some wept, remembering their own actions. The learning curve was hard but necessary. Prejudice left scars, and no one wanted to repeat them. The director approached Geraldo. "You not only saved the bank's dignity, but you also gave us a new opportunity to be better." It was a rare acknowledgement, coming from someone who was also responsible for what happened. Geraldo, calm, responded simply, "Life is a school. Some learn with love, others only learn through pain. But the important thing is to learn." His words marked the end of that day. And so, before everyone's eyes, the transformation began. The bank that had once humiliated would now learn to respect. And all thanks to a simple farmer who proved that greatness isn't something you wear, it's something you live. "How many of you laughed at me without even knowing me?" Geraldo's question, asked in a calm voice, resounded like thunder in everyone's conscience. No one answered. The shame was so great that even the air felt heavy. The farmer, previously seen as an intruder, was now the highest authority in the room. His gaze pierced every face like a mirror, forcing everyone to look at themselves. The clients looked away, unable to bear the guilt. Those who mocked felt the echo of their own words, like invisible stabs. The cowering employees knew the scene would never be forgotten. The agency, so accustomed to luxury and arrogance, was now the scene of a lesson that would cost them their lives. Geraldo continued, "Respect is the only currency that never loses value. Without it, money is empty and power is fragile." The simple yet powerful phrase echoed off the marble walls. Some customers gulped, others wept silently. It was impossible not to be moved by the truth. The director approached, his head bowed. "Mr. Geraldo, on behalf of this agency, I apologize. What happened here should never have happened." His voice trembled, filled with regret. Geraldo simply nodded, without arrogance. He didn't need excuses to know he had won. The real victory was change. The employees whispered promises that they would never make that mistake again. Each one carried a moral wound, and they knew the farmer hadn't been humiliated. It was they who had truly been diminished by their own arrogance. The role reversal was forever etched in their minds. Geraldo, adjusting his straw hat, smiled slightly. It wasn't a smile of revenge, but that of someone who had done his duty. "I came here for a simple transfer. I'm leaving with something much greater, the certainty that, even in a world blinded by appearances, the truth always finds its way." His serene tone moved even the hardest hearts. Some customers approached to apologize in person. A man in a tie murmured, "Sir, today I learned that you can't judge a person by their clothes." Another added, "You showed us what really matters." Geraldo heard every word, but didn't need to respond. His silence was enough. The branch, once brimming with pride, now exuded humility. The transformation was complete. Every look, every gesture demonstrated that no one would leave the bank the same. The bank was no longer just a luxurious building, it was now also a place of reflection. All thanks to a simple man who didn't need to shout to be heard. Geraldo took a few steps toward the door. The sound of his boots resonated like a hammer blow in everyone's conscience. Before leaving, he paused and looked back. "Remember, never treat anyone as less than you, because sometimes it's precisely that person who holds what you value most." His last sentence was the perfect closing. The silence following his words was absolute. It was the silence of someone learning, of someone ashamed, and at the same time transformed. The farmer walked through the bank doors not as a customer, but as a symbol. a living example that dignity is not measured by appearance, but by essence. And so ends the story of Geraldo Almeida, the man who was humiliated and that same day showed who was in charge. A lesson in humility, respect, and justice. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel now, because here you'll find many other moving, true stories that transform lives. Don't miss the next one. It could be the lesson you most need to hear.